Hello, and welcome to a new kind of video. We're trying something a little bit different. It's something I've been wanting to make for a while, but I keep just not starting it. I keep wanting it to be perfect. I keep trying to plan out too much or too little, and then I get really caught up in the details of it. But I think the correct choice with this is just to dive into it, and I want to go for it. And I'm really excited, and I hope you enjoy it. It's very different from my normal content, although I may end up putting a speed art in the background for some of this or something along those lines. Welcome to the first episode of a new series called Annalyze, and that is spelled with two N's because my name is Anna. Yes, so in Annalyze, I really want to. There are two things I want to accomplish. I want to be analyzing fiction overall. And so I think some of these videos will be me picking a trope and analyzing it across different shows and books. And other videos will be me choosing one show or one book, or at one point I was considering comparing like the Handmaid's Tale show versus the Handmaid's Tale book. And just delving into that. And so for this first video, because I didn't necessarily want to do an anime for the first video of this series, but if I don't just start, it's never gonna happen. So, welcome to my analysis of Code Geass. So, for those of you who haven't seen the show Code Geass, I highly recommend it. It's just really good. It's really well done. The artwork is beautiful. I think the art style is really interesting. This is an art channel, so I'm going to talk about the art, okay? Deal with it. One of the things I find really interesting in the art style is the relationship between hands, eyes, and faces. So one of just visually appealing things is the way different characters rest their head on their hands. I just think it looks really interesting, and like the fingers are a little bit longer than they naturally would be, and it just creates like an interesting effect. But also overall, thematically, eyes are the spirit of the character. It's in this show especially, it's their morality. It's what they're willing to do and what they're willing to accomplish. And their hands are their actions. It is what they actually do to accomplish their goals. And that's why very frequently when I'm going to explain a bit about what the show is about in a second, but it's why when the main character is using his power, which is activated through the eyes, he always seems to cover his eye with his hand before, like, moving it out super dramatically, because the main character is a dramatic crumpet, and I love him. And it's just a very interesting thing that melds themes in the show with the art style, which is something I love about animation, is how you're able to combine that so seamlessly. So it's kind of like how in a book you can combine themes with interesting wording to create nuanced meaning. It's very fascinating to me. So let's get into it. So Code Geass follows the main character, Lelouch, who... I'll get into his last name in a second. Basically, he is this kid in this... There's this alternate history that's happened. I always feel the need to provide a lot of context, but whatever. Basically, in this alternate history, the United States Revolutionary War never happened, and so Britain continued to build its empire and build it and build it and build it, and became the world power. There are a couple other empires that are mentioned, but they don't have nearly as much power as Britannia, as it's called. And so the main character, Lelouch, was one of the princes of Britannia, and but his mother was killed, and his sister was blinded and crippled, and so they are now living in this kind of outcast colony, which is called Area 11, and it's Japan. This is going to be a very long video in case... I mean, you can see the timestamp, so you know, but I'm just recording. I don't have a script. I'm just going off the top of my head because I just finished rewatching this show, just so you know. But yeah, so he is now, rather than using the prince last name, which is Lelouch de Bretagne, he's using his commoner kind of last name, Lelouch Lamperouge. Yeah, so he ends up encountering this woman, C2, and I know that some people call her CC because that's how it's spelled, but in the English dub, which is all I've seen, she goes by C2, so that's what I'm calling her. She is an immortal witch who gives him the power of Geass. And Geass, in his case, ends up being the ability to give a commandment to anyone who he makes eye contact with. It will only work one time, but yeah, and so that's the thing with the eyes. I'll probably put in some video to show what I'm talking about. But yeah, so that's the concept in a nutshell, and a bit about the plot is it is Lelouch's goal to, at the beginning it's his goal to fight with the Japanese resistance to try to separate from Britannia with the goal of taking down the Empire of Britannia. So there's your synopsis that I've really only spoiled, like, episode 1, so I very much encourage you to watch it, and this video will contain spoilers. I can't say specifically what spoilers it'll contain, because again, running without a map, but, yeah, so if you're looking for a new show to watch, I recommend watching that. It is on Netflix now, apparently. So yeah, do that. Alright, so to get into the video, there are a couple things I want to talk about. I think I'm going to group it into 2 sections, and that's kind of more general, miscellaneous things that I want to talk about as having been really well done, or that I find really interesting. And then my other thing is I want to talk about, I mean, I guess you could say it's love interests and their interesting effect on the plot, but it's not even inherently love interests. It's so much as how the show uses secondary characters to reflect different aspects of the main character while also giving them their own interesting arcs. So I'm going to start with that. So, in the show, Lelouch has a couple of love interests, and one person who officially isn't a love interest, but like, come on guys, basically is a love interest, functions in a very similar way. And I find this very interesting, overall, the concept of the love interest in Code Geass, because watching it now, rewatching it now, it's very clear to me that Lelouch is an aromantic character. For those who don't know, and who I guess haven't seen my, what did I call it? The Toon Me challenge, where I drew a bunch of aromantic people for Aromantic Pride Week. Or Aromantic Awareness Week, sorry. Aromanticism is a romantic orientation where someone does not feel romantic attraction. So it is very similar to asexuality, which is a sexual orientation where people do not feel sexual attraction, but it is its own thing. I also think Lelouch is ace, but that's slightly up to interpretation, frankly, just depending on how you interpret that one scene with, I think it was with Colin. That felt very out of character, but intentionally so. Basically at one point, when he basically believes all is lost, that his purpose, that all of his goals have become totally unattainable, he has become completely obsolete, he basically has this one episode where he's just really depressed, and I don't know, he's like, oh, you could call in, you could console me, there are things a woman can do. But that just seemed more like posturing. Not posturing, but like he's logically operating on what other people have said, of what concepts have been presented to him. And it's very hard to explain that type of stuff to people who I don't even want to say just like allo people, that is, people who do feel romantic, do feel sexual attraction. But I think it's explained very well in a Twitter thread. Sorry, I just dropped the thing I was fiddling with, because I fiddle with things. My magnets. That's why if you hear clicking in like all of my videos, it's my magnets that I fiddle with. What was I saying? Yeah, okay, so Rose Thor, who's fabulous, by the way, on Twitter, she's an arrow icon. She made a very interesting thread about the Hunger Games, doing a queer reading of the Hunger Games, stating that Katniss is aromantic. And what she was describing was how a really lot of arrow people and ace people will put on a facade of feeling romantic attraction or feeling sexual attraction because that's what society has taught them to do, even if they're not really feeling that attraction. And that makes it very complicated to do queer readings of these types of things, because very often even a creator isn't entirely aware that that's the character they're portraying, because of how little is known about aromanticism and asexuality. Although, interestingly, there is a canonically aro ace character in the show, Lloyd, who's fabulous, by the way, although they don't use any of the vocabulary words. Yeah, so where was I? So that was just a bit of a preface saying Lelouch is an aromantic character. So that means that puts all of his love interests in a very interesting position, because none of them get chosen. It isn't a love triangle. It isn't a love... Gosh, how many love interests does he have? Let's see there. Okay, his love interest. Shirley, who is someone he's on the student council with at his high school. And basically, Lelouch is living a double life. Or a triple life, however many lives he's living at this point. But he's basically living a double life with his actions as the terrorist Zero, who is fighting with the Japanese resistance, and the Britannian student Lelouch Lamperouge. Yeah, so Shirley is one of his friends at the student council, and she has a massive crush on him that I find kind of annoying a lot of the time, but I came to appreciate a lot more in this rewatch. Yeah. So then there is C2, who is kind of more his equal. She is the one who gave him his Geass, but she always knows more things than him in an interesting way, while at the same time, like, she's not as clever and strategic as he is, but she has kind of an equal bearing of information, which puts her also in an interesting position. Then there is Colin, who is one of the Black Knights, which is the organization that Lelouch as Zero runs, which is the Japanese resistance. And then I'm including this person here, although technically he isn't a love interest. Then there is Suzaku, who is his oldest friend. Someone who knew him back when he was, like... Yeah, he's just his oldest friend, and he's known him pretty much his whole life. And they are in a very interesting position in that they are very much opposite sides of the same coin. Wherein Suzaku really believes in fixing the bad parts of a system from inside the system. You have to have good means, or else your ends mean nothing. Which is completely the opposite perspective of Lelouch, who believes that the ends always justify the means if they are good enough, and that you can't fix a broken system within the system because it will just never work. You'll never be able to have a great enough effect. A great enough impact, rather. I really hope this video comes out good. This is an experiment, guys. So, gotta stop apologizing. You don't have to listen. If you don't like it, feel free to leave. But if you do like it, please leave me a comment because they make me happy. Anyway, so what's really fascinating about these love interests is that none of them are truly love interests. Oh, I forgot a love interest. Heck, what is her name? Kaguya. Princess Kaguya she's never a love interest in the sense that she had a chance with him, but she has a crush on Zero. And I don't know, she's very interesting because she represents kind of culturally a person that is important while also not having a lot of functional power, but she has in a way a lot of diplomatic power, but she's very young, so she never really had a chance with him. Yeah. So let's break down these people one by one. So Shirley is fascinating because there are times when it is implied that Lelouch really did love her and he didn't realize that. But I kind of call BS on that, but I think what's fascinating about Shirley is what she represents. The side of Lelouch that she represents is Lelouch Lamperouge. She is the fun times that he has with the student council, despite the fact that they can never truly be his equal. It's a very interesting position. And she also represents, in a way, the innocent bystanders of the war. Because when it comes down to it, Code Geass is a war anime with a high school subplot, which is a fascinating position. And I remember the first time I watched it, I found the high school subplot painfully boring, but this time I really appreciated it. And it's very interesting. So, fairly early on, Zero makes this very strategic move to cause a landslide that would wipe out a lot of the enemy troops. And it did, and it was successful. And he's moved another piece on his chessboard successfully. Then we find out that Shirley's father was killed in that landslide. And suddenly, it's not just a bunch of soldiers being killed. They're people. And so, when Lelouch looks at Shirley and sees her crying over the death of her father, he sees she represents the families of every single person he's caused the death of. And a part of him genuinely doesn't care because he truly believes that the ends justify the means. He believes his ends are justified enough that it doesn't matter how many people die. And he's someone who, while he doesn't often kill people directly as in with his hands, he kills them with his Geass. He will look into someone's eyes and say, die. And they will. They will die for him. Happily. And it's very fascinating. That is the first command he makes with his Geass power. And I think that is very intentional. So he's not afraid of death and he doesn't feel guilt over killing enemy soldiers. And yet, there's Shirley, and her father is dead. And how can any ends justify that action? And that's what's called into question, and he feels guilt over that. He feels like he's ruining so many lives, and it calls into question his entire value system for a moment. And later on, Shirley sees the face of Zero. Zero hides behind a mask. And she sees that it's Lelouch, and she is extremely conflicted about it. And Lelouch, I'm going to talk about Mao at some point, but I'm not going to talk about him now, so I'm going to skip a bit of what happens. Long story short, Lelouch ends up using his Geass on her to basically forget all of that he's the one who caused the pain because she was suicidal at that point, basically. And so that's very interesting in and of itself. But then we still have the same bubbly Shirley who falls in love with Lelouch again. And he never falls in love with her. 100% does not. But then, later on, she is killed. And she's killed in kind of like mid-ish late season 2. At a point when we've been very much sidelining the high school side of Lelouch. And he's been really delving into his identities as Lelouch v. Britannia, as well as Zero. And yet, it still makes him very happy, in a very simple way, to interact with the people on the student council, to hang out with his friends who know him only as Lelouch Lamperouge. And then Shirley is killed. And she's killed by someone on Lelouch's side who, I mean, you could argue that there are a bunch of other reasons there, but who justifies it as she knew your identity, so it made sense for her to die. But when she died, that was the death of Lelouch Lamperouge. And that's what Shirley is. That is what that particular love interest is. She is Lelouch Lamperouge, the student, the person who has a simple stake in life, who gets to just be an ordinary person. Alright, so that's that love interest, which is very interesting to me. Next, let's talk about Colin. Colin is a member of the Black Knights of that resistance, and she truly believes in Zero. If you were to argue that she has a crush on or is in love with or all that jazz, I don't really get it. But on anyone, it would be on Zero, the person who she respects. Even though Colin also interacts with Lelouch Lamperouge, that is not the person who she's the love interest for. And I don't have as dramatic a statement as all the death and the memory bending and stuff like that for Colin, but it is interesting at various points when people ask, oh, so you're dating Zero, or you're in love with Zero, or anything like that. She always denies it, which, I mean, I think that's fair, but anyway. What Colin represents is Zero. That is the side of Lelouch that she represents. And it's also very interesting because she is loyal to Zero till the end. And the time she feels the most conflicted about that is when she finds out the identity of Zero. As just some student, as Lelouch Lamperouge, as Lelouch Lee Britannia. And yet, still she retains faith in him. And at the end of the show, and I remind you, spoilers, my friend, mega freaking spoilers. So, at the end of the show, Lelouch has stacked every card against himself so that he can basically die for the sins of humanity. Not to, he doesn't put himself in a Jesus-y place, but he basically makes himself the most hated person in the world so that when he dies, all the people's hate basically can die with him. And he positions somebody else to pose as Zero, to wear the mask. And Colin sees Zero, and she cries, and she says, that's Zero. It has to be him, despite knowing full well that that is not the same Zero she knew. Which is very interesting. So Colin is Zero, and Shirley is Lelouch Lamperouge. Now, I can't fully say that C2 represents Lelouch Lee Britannia. I cannot confidently say that she represents Lelouch Lee Britannia, but she represents something else, and that is a person who is equal but separate. And she and Lelouch kiss multiple times. Like, I'm pretty sure Lelouch kisses Shirley at some point. Possibly twice. I don't really remember. I don't know. It wasn't that important. I don't even remember if he kisses Colin. I don't notice that stuff that well. But it is interesting to see C2. C2 is more an external force of nature. She's someone who's a neutral figure who is there for protecting Lelouch's life and quite often protecting what gives him reason to live, which is his sister, and other times his purpose, his value system, and all that jazz. Yeah, so I wouldn't necessarily say she represents a specific part of him, but if I were to do that, I would say she represents Lelouch Lee Britannia, the person who will take down the Empire of Britannia. Someone who is, in a way, larger than life and yet is a very small human person. And it's very interesting how their interactions are there to grant each other humanity. And what I like is they never call each other boyfriend and girlfriend and da-da-da-da-da. The only time they have that type of discussion, they call each other friends. And I think that's what that relationship is. Feel free to fight me on that, but that just someone who is equal to him and yet separate. Someone who has no stake in the conflict. That is what C2 is. Yeah, so that's kind of interesting, but kind of separate. Alright, so... Okay, so Kaguya, again, I mentioned, she represents the power and symbolism of Zero. Yeah, I'm just gonna leave that there. I just don't feel like donating too much time to that because it just wasn't... I don't know, it wasn't as big a thing. Alright, let's talk about Suzaku. Suzaku is very interesting because he doesn't represent one side of Lelouch. And at the beginning of the show, he represents the opposite side of the coin of Lelouch. He represents I mentioned this, but he represents the person who will follow the system. The ends do not justify the means if the means are bad enough. Work it following the rules. While Lelouch's, the ends, if they are important enough, will always justify the means. You have to fight the system. This evolves quite a bit as the characters do, and Suzaku's morals and everything else are very much called into question. But what ends up happening is Suzaku represents Lelouch. Lelouch without a last name. Just him. And the evolution he goes through. They are like so close to being the same person while being entirely separate people. And it's fascinating. It's so interesting to watch. And you also see it many times in the imagery throughout the show. Just little things like, I don't know, the time when Lelouch is falling off of a roof and Suzaku, like, catches him, and there's this moment. And it's a great moment, I gotta say. You know, if I were to ship Lelouch with someone, I would ship him with Suzaku, personally. But I cannot comfortably do that because he's aromantic. So, anyway. Yeah. And it's very interesting to me. I'm trying to think of other examples. Okay. In the ending theme for, at the very least, the last third or last quarter of the show, I don't remember how much the ending theme changed. But the very last frame is Lelouch and Suzaku standing together, basically. And there are a lot of lines like, we could accomplish all of this working together. Like, we could accomplish anything as long as we are together. The imagery used within the show, from a line from Suzaku, is that Suzaku is Lelouch's sword, while C2 is his shield. Which is very interesting, just not specifically what I'm talking about here. I'm trying to think of, like, better examples so I can just convey what I'm thinking. But it's really interesting. You just have to watch the show. I'll see if I can insert clips and stuff here, but I don't know if that's gonna happen. Hello, this is future Anna here, editing. So I was finding it very difficult to explain in words that particular relationship that I was talking about, how Suzaku, like the side of Lelouch that the side of Lelouch that Suzaku represents. And it's really because both of their arcs are very, very complex and very, very intertwined. And it's more so that they are mirror images of each other rather than being the same person, or rather than him representing a specific side of Lelouch. And that's why I describe him as representing Lelouch without a last name, just that person. And I think I've figured out a better way to describe my meaning, in that Suzaku represents Lelouch and Lelouch's life. He represents his struggles by going through mirror struggles, by having similar things that are so easily comparable and yet so different and unique to the character. And I think a great example of that is, in a way, Lelouch being aware of it. And they compare themselves to each other a lot. And it's a driving force of the plot, including when Suzaku really hates Lelouch in part of the show, because Lelouch caused the death of Suzaku's kind of girlfriend, although I think Suzaku's guilt about that was, I think Suzaku's mourning of that character is less because he was in love with her, and more because it's what I think of as, like, the death as an angelic quality thing, where, like, I think of it as, like, oh, death could put a halo on the devil's own head. So because she died so early into their relationship, he feels that, like, that relationship is immortalized in its best moments, and therefore it seems so perfect, and no one can ever compare it to a dead person. So that's my opinion on that. I don't want to get too sidetracked, but that's for context. And so Suzaku, that's his hate for Lelouch is what drives his morals to be called into question, and he ends up becoming more and more like Lelouch out of his hate for him. And it's very interesting. And at a certain point, he becomes very aware of it when he is threatening to use a drug on Colin in an interrogation to get her to tell him about Lelouch. And he realizes that would be exactly like Lelouch, that he's being exactly the same as him. And he stops, because that wasn't what he wanted to be. That changes kind of as the narrative goes, and he realizes that Lelouch's methods Lelouch's plan, rather, is very synced up with what Suzaku's goals become, and they end up working together for the last, like, few episodes, and it's amazing, and they're an unstoppable force together. But so the specific example I want to talk about in regards to Suzaku representing Lelouch's life is when Lelouch uses his Geass on Suzaku. And Suzaku is someone who is in his way. He is the opposing army's strongest fighter, which puts him he's a problem. He should definitely be eliminated, and that's something that Lelouch would have done to any other character. He would have eliminated them. And instead, he so-called curses Suzaku to live. That is the Geass. He commands him to live. And it's kind of revealed that Suzaku has had basically a death wish, due to guilt, kind of like, I don't necessarily want to say he's suicidal, because it's not quite like that, but it is very, very close to being like that. And so Yeah, so the Geass he uses is to make Suzaku live, because I think killing Suzaku would be to kill Lelouch, and I think to a certain extent the characters realize that, even subconsciously, and that's why even when he makes it so that Suzaku can't be killed by his hand, basically, and Suzaku fights that and he calls it a curse, and it's fascinating. And in those last few episodes of the show, when they're working together, Suzaku has found a way to use that Geass that compels him to live as a way, as an advantage in fighting. And that, again, syncs him up perfectly with Lelouch in that part of the show. Yeah, so that was just me figuring out how to a lot better phrase, better quantify the argument I'm trying to make there. That was just really hard for me to sum up something that happened so in such complexity throughout the entire show. Yeah, so I'm going to insert this and then we'll get back to the original video. Hope you're enjoying it so far. So, yeah, so that is what I find very interesting about the love interests, how the bulk of them represent just different sides to Lelouch, while also they all fulfill their own arcs. Like, I'm not expressing that very well here because I don't know how much it would benefit for me to lay out the entire arc of every character, because you just don't need that much context. But if you watch the show, what I challenge you to do is watch and rewatch the show having watched this video, and I want to hear your thoughts. I want to see how you feel having seen it in this lens. Because that's something that I love about analysis videos, is I will often see an analysis video and that will make me want to watch a show. I ignore all the spoiler warnings because I suck. But then again, I watch the show. I recommend watching Replay Value, does amazing analyses of anime specifically. I recommend watching, what's her name? Quinn Curio did an amazing analysis of Gotham, an amazing analysis of Umbrella Academy. I want to say she's done other shows too, but I don't remember which ones. But anyway, it's fascinating to hear people's thoughts and hear them break down what makes a show, what makes a book, or whatever. What makes a trope its own. For amazing trope discussions, look up Overly Sarcastic Productions, obviously. Yeah, I find it very interesting. So, let's get into the second half of this video where I talk about all the miscellaneous things that I find fascinating. Magnets. Okay. This is gonna be so hard to edit. This is gonna be such a pain. Yes. Okay. What do I want to start with? Okay, so one thing I find very fascinating in the show is the use of mecha. And if you don't know, mecha's like these giant kind of robot machines that people use for fighting. Anyway, in the show, I'll put up a picture of them. In the show, they are called Nightmares, spelled with a K, which is very clever. And it's very fascinating to me, the impact that they have on the story, because I know a lot of people are just like really into mecha because they look cool, which is understandable, because they do indeed look cool. But I find it very interesting, their impact on the narrative, because it gives the ability to have the intimacy and complexity of a hand-to-hand combat battle between two characters who can be having a conversation while they fight, with the extreme destructive power of an advanced futuristic war machine. And it's fascinating. One of the things that's so interesting is it's not just a throwaway machine that guarantees a one battle. It's not just a stagnant piece of machinery. There's constant innovation happening within the show, because war, unfortunately, is one of the biggest causes of innovation. I say unfortunately because it'd be great if we could innovate without having to kill each other. But like the internet is a product of war, in a way. Not even in a way, it was a military thing. Anyway. But yeah, so there's constant innovation happening, and it's very interesting. So, just, yeah, that was just like a small thing that I find very fascinating. Um, Small hand to hand combat things. Yeah, like, you get to have the interesting conversation of that, what was it, like a duel. The duel in, what's it called? Princess Bride. With, what was his name? With Wesley and, Inigo Montoya. You get to have that type of conversation and that type of intricacy with the extreme power and war capabilities of, I'm trying to think of a good example in another show, but I'm not getting anything. But of, like, just massive war machines, basically. It's obviously meant to be futuristic, and that is one of the plot points, that Britannia had this amazing innovation in creating the nightmares, and therefore had an extreme advantage in war. And that brings me into my next point, which is, how do I want to phrase this? One of the issues with that the main character faces, what I would in fact call his fatal flaw. While he's very prideful, I cannot comfortably call his fatal flaw pride. Because his fatal flaw is human nature. And that's that people aren't chess pieces. You can't put someone in a room and expect them to not try to escape. And that's fascinating throughout the entire show. Nothing is stagnant. There are a million moving pieces all moving at once and not moving under the same command. There's doubt in people's mind. You can't have a perfectly effective army unless, like Lelouch does at one point, unless you command them all to follow your every order without question. Using magic, basically. Yeah, it's very, very interesting. So, the reason I use that, the point on nightmares to transition is because of the constant innovation happening in the nightmares. One of the biggest, I guess you could say, in a way, inciting incidents is the invention of the Lancelot nightmare, which is the one that Suzaku uses in direct conflict to Lelouch and Zero, which is so interesting. That is invented, and it changes the course of battle throughout the thing. The Flea is invented throughout the show. The Flea, which is basically an atomic bomb fired from, fired like a missile, which is invented in the course of this show because, due to the changed events in history, World Wars I and II never happened, which is just very fascinating, I gotta say. Yeah. At one point, the nightmares gain the ability to have very effective air maneuvers because they get the ability to fly. Shields are increased. The thematic meaning of each individual character can be equally represented by their nightmare, which is fascinating. So, for example, Lelouch is in a position where he has this very kind of dressy, dramatic, like, theatrical nightmare that he stole from someone at some point. And it's not great at combat. It's great at having a shield to protect the person inside. It's another mask. At the same time, it represents how Lelouch has positioned himself in a position of such power, a commanding position, and yet he can't necessarily be the hand that does the direct action, because he doesn't have the direct combat power in that instance, even if he does fight sometimes. In a way, he's entirely defenseless at all times, despite having that great shield. But he can't effectively fight back. He needs Suzaku to be his sword and all that fascinating stuff. And Colin is also his sword at other times. It's very interesting. Or Suzaku, again, being the direct, being very similar and very different from Lelouch. Lelouch sucks at running, which is just a tiny detail that I enjoy immensely. I don't know why. And meanwhile, Suzaku is a so-called exercise nut and is amazing at running. He's a soldier trained in extreme precision and power. And so his nightmare has the fighting power that is almost unmatched. And it's very interesting. Stuff like that. Colin, I mean, if you want to get super metaphorical and thematic, Colin is always reaching forward for the next step for the Japanese, for the next step in the resistance. And her Guren, as it's called, her nightmare, has a hand that reaches forward and destroys. Like, it's very interesting. And there are many other things, and you can also definitely get into some thematic stuff with Suzaku at one point, and also another character who is canonically gay using a nightmare that's called the Ganymede, who is, the god of homosexual love in Greek mythology. But I'm not here to debate that. I'm here to analyze all this random stuff without any organization or scripting. That's fine. Yes, let's do this. What other things did I want to mention? Okay, my final thing, and then you're all free to leave, is the ending theme of the show for like the last quarter or third, like I mentioned. I'm gonna pull up the lyrics so that I can actually mention them. Let me just mute my computer. It's so fascinating because every episode in this last third or quarter, I don't know exactly how much time this particular theme was used. It has the same lyrics, and they chose, I don't know if in the official one they chose to do this, but in, at the very least, the version of the show that I have on my computer, and it was downloaded from some website at some point, it includes the English translation of the lyrics, which I find very fascinating. So the show really likes to end off, not inherently on cliffhangers, but it quite likes to end off every episode in the middle of a sentence. Every scene in the middle of a sentence. Not every single one, and not to the point of being annoying, but it's very interesting. But things are always changing right at the end of each moment. And it changes the meaning of... So every time after that last scene, that last moment, often cutting off in the middle of a sentence, in the middle of a glance, we see these same lyrics. And they change their meaning every time to evolve with the show. So I'm going to read out the English translation of the lyrics. This corrupt world is filled with demons. What is justice? Resist, don't just question, the flower of evil. Dreams of hypocrisy. Give your gaze to the eyes that see them. The line between right and wrong cannot be known. Light is gone, and you slumber, like an unborn child in the womb of darkness. So there's a lot more lyrics, and they all are very interesting. But that first couple lines they're the ones that you see every time. I don't think that they're counting on every person watching every episode to the end and reading every lyric. I don't think that's the case. Although you could analyze every lyric. I don't know if the song was written specifically for the show or if they just found one that fit every episode perfectly in a different way. But yeah, so it's really interesting how it changes and how it presents the themes in the show. So, for example, the inability to draw lines between good and evil, that is a theme in the show. Every character has a different belief system, a different value system, and none of them are inherently better than the others, even if some of them clearly seem more amoral. I think for quite a lot of the show, Schneisel, who's the Prime Minister and Prince of Britannia, Lelouch's half-brother, who is equal in who's his equal in strategy, basically. He doesn't seem inherently evil for quite a while until he uses the Flea warheads to indiscriminately kill a lot of people. And yet then he justifies it, saying, well, what's a few billion lives in comparison to eternal peace? And it's weirdly similar to Lelouch's ideals. What is like a few thousand lives in comparison to eternal peace? And no, it isn't the same scale. And yes, we all hate Schneisel. But it is very interesting how they present different belief systems. Suzaku's belief that you can change things from within the system, that the means have to be just in order for the ends to count. Lelouch's belief that anything goes as long as the end goal is good enough, is just enough. Even small lines in this song, such as the turn your gaze to the eyes that see them, that was immediately changed in meaning in one of the last episodes of the show when the younger sister, Nonnally, gains her sight back and looks Lelouch in the eye for the first time in 8 years. And suddenly, turn your gaze to the eyes that see them has a different meaning than it did last episode. It's extremely fascinating. Another line from the song that is extremely thematic is dreams of hypocrisy. And I know that's just like one statement, and yet it fits the character so well. The amount of the time characters are called hypocrites for presenting one belief system and yet clearly doing actions differently. You could even probably analyze the artwork in a lot of those scenes and see how the hands are positioned versus the eyes versus everything else in the setup and the composition. It's extremely fascinating and everything is clearly intentional. Oh my gosh, the show is fascinating. Yeah, it's very interesting, and it's saying one of the biggest okay. One thing in traditional analysis is pulling out themes in a work. And themes are quite commonly defined as a thesis statement of sorts. What is one statement, one message that you think the author is sending you? And I would like to go completely against that and say that's not what a theme is. I think a theme in a work is a question that is asked to the audience, that every character would answer differently. And that's a theme, in my opinion. And there should never be one definite answer because that's not what a work of fiction is for. And I don't think there has to be a purpose. I don't think there has to be a defined purpose. What this show asks, what its theme is, what is justice, what is justified, and can you ever truly not be a hypocrite? That is the question. It's saying, can you justify your ends to your means if now what your actions are doing completely contrasts your original stated goal? And there isn't an answer. And every character, like I said, would answer it entirely differently. And I think that is the genius of this show, is how it deals with morality and how it doesn't answer those questions. So yeah, so 50 minutes. This has been Annalyze. I really hope you enjoyed this. I am so happy I finally recorded. It is 1:12 a.m. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you stayed this whole time and just like improved my watch time by like 50 minutes, I am so happy that you're here, and I hope you're doing good. And I really, really want to hear all of your thoughts in the comments. Comments are so nice, and they are feedback, and I don't get comments very often. The editing for this video is going to be quite hellish. So, yeah. I really hope you enjoyed this. I might have said that already, but whatever. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I want to know what your thoughts are on Code Geass, if you noticed any other things. I've noticed so many other things more than this, but this is just what's on the top of my head, having literally finished rewatching the show. I mean, I guess it would be an hour ago, 8 minutes before I started recording this video, because I was feeling emotions and had to get them out, okay? I leave you with the quote by Oscar Wilde. A true friend stabs you in the front, not the back. And thus, every single Code Geass fan now wants to personally fight me. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Hope you enjoyed Annalyze. Don't forget to subscribe. I also do art. If this is the first video you're seeing of mine, this isn't my normal content. Maybe one day it will be. But right now, I mostly do art stuff, and I also post music videos sometimes because they're fun to edit. Yeah, if you want to commission me for character art, DM me on Twitter at RosemaryCat5. Feel free to also tell me your comments on this video on Twitter. Or email me, rosemarycat5art@gmail.com. I have a Redbubble shop with a lot of cool art stuff. Yeah. I'm RosemaryCat5 on that as well. Thanks for watching. Bye.